Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Insight. I believe this is our 33rd installment, actually 34th. And so we're so happy that you have joined us on this evening. Insight is a program designed to not only bring information, but to put some of the wonderfully astute people that would be on this program and information that can be given to us as a community and for those who've been watching all over the world. We've had people who contact us from Ghana and certainly people who have contacted us from France to say how much they enjoyed it. So we're thankful to God for that. Never really saw all of this coming, but we're thankful to that. Now, before we present our guests, I want everyone to know that Insight will continue on until the 30th of June. In July and August, we will be off because we're going to do some more creative things as we resume on September the 1st. So we're thankful to God for that and thankful for all of you who have tuned in. Tonight is a real great and special guest who has spoken at the Bethlehem Nation in 2019. She has a book called Pure Joy, which is part of the camp library. And of course, the guest is Dr. Jennifer JonesAustin, Esquire. Now I want to let everyone know that there is a Cash App. We're asking that you would be a blessing to her and that you would see the Cash App as it comes on the screen, that you would certainly be a blessing to her. Certainly we can show our appreciation for her because this was not intended, but I got to ask you, first of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Austin, for being with us.
I'm so glad to be here. I am a great admirer of you. Thank God that you saw fit to bring me into the Bethlehem Nation just a few years ago, and that you thought enough of me to bring me back for this special platform. You are a leader in our city, and I'm doing just great things in the Brooklyn community and beyond. And so it's a blessing to be with you. I really appreciate it.
Well, now 2 weeks ago, I had your aunt, Sylvia Harris, on. She was quite. Yeah, how'd you miss that? You've been so busy.
You know, I saw that I saw somewhere on Facebook where you said the most wonderful, beautiful, kind and giving things about her, and I think I commented on it, but I didn't know that she was with you. So I've now got to go looking for that.
You can see that on YouTube because all thing you have to do is type in Insight Larry Kemp and you'll be able to see that, which was on March the 10th. So you'll be able to see that. And but she had my wife went down to the church today because we're doing something with our pantry, and your aunt has sent us a book about her and her husband, Dr. Michael Neely Harris. And so I had to call her today and thank her for the book. She wrote on it on March the 11th. And so as a result of that, she was probably wondering if I got it, but I did receive it from her. Now, before I ask you anything else, or maybe I should save that for last, because there's something recently that happened.
Whatever you want to go with, I'm with you. I'm just going with you.
Okay.
I'm going
Now,
with God, so I'm going with you.
okay, I'm gonna save this for last because I'm sure you can give us extensive information in regards to it. So I'll save
Okay.
that for last. But now, uh, if you would please be so kind, share your early life and how your life has been in those early stages and the formative years in growing up.
Absolutely. So, again, I'm just so appreciative of your having me. And when I talk about my early life, it takes me back to my first conversation with you. Now, I guess nearing, we're coming up on 3 years where uh, we engaged, we talked via phone, and you shared with me some beautiful memories that you have of my father, who was a minister here in the Brooklyn community, William Augustus Jones, who pastored Bethany Baptist Church. And I just remember how your words touched me, and it was just so encouraging for me to know that his work and his memory, his legacy continues. So I grew up here in Brooklyn. I grew up the daughter of a Baptist minister and a woman who was an art curator. We grew up in, I guess, initially in the early years, a very traditional home on President Street in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh,
And the
yeah.
thing I'll share about President Street was
Preachers
that
Row.
it was Preachers Row. There
That's
were
right.
on that row were the parsonages of Cornerstone Baptist Church, Concord Baptist Church, and at that time Gardner Taylor was the pastor. Bethany Baptist Church, and then Washington Temple with
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, with FT, what was his name?
Bishop F.D. Washington, yes.
FT Washington. And so I grew up around the faith community, and then just down the street, literally 3 doors from my home, was the home of Shirley Chisholm.
Yeah.
And my sister and I used to go to her house on Friday afternoons for champagne cola and Hershey bars. And so I share that background because, our surroundings and our exposure have a lot to do with our development in ways that we may not even really appreciate.
Absolutely.
Growing up around preachers, around faith leaders, around community leaders. My father was also very active in the civil rights movement. I grew up with this great sense of community and responsibility to your community. I grew up appreciating that from my father. His pulpit was not just, the statuesque, mounting in this church edifice, but it was the community at large. So that really kind of like has an impact on who you are and how you think about the world. Growing up in a church where a lot of people showed me love, made me feel like I was special and like I mattered. And then having a mother who, again, wasn't like we were, all together. And then my parents divorced when I was 10. And my mother became the first Black woman to head up a Fortune 500 art collection program. So I saw a Black woman finding her space in a predominantly white, male-dominated world. That experience, and all while being in the church and having a mother and father who, even though they were divorced, raised their children together, and who in our later years actually came back together. So all of those experiences helped me to appreciate that I was loved, I was supported, I was a part of a community that was about leaning in and doing more for others, being trailblazers, trying to make a difference, and basically or fundamentally living a life with purpose. And I think that, like getting all of that has really helped shape and mold me to be who I believe God intends for me to be today.
I love your transparency when you talked about your parents, at 10, and then of course later on getting back together. But I do want to ask you this because naturally I have children, but other than what you have said, how was it growing up as a PK? Preacher's kid, pastor's kid. How was that?
So my father was a PK.
That's right.
And his father was a PK. I often tell people I'm a PK, GPK, and a GGPK. And I share that because I think that our upbringing was influenced by his upbringing. I remember when I remember my father used to play with us. He would dance with us and he'd play with us, and when I was coming up, dancing was not a really thing that was done if you were in the church. But he would dance with us and he'd have fun with us. I remember when I was maybe about 16 or 17 years old, I think I may have stayed out too late, but there was something that caused my father to be concerned. And what I remember most was that the next morning he came into my bedroom and he kissed me on my forehead and he said, "Just be careful." And he turned around and he walked out. Now, that is so significant to me because he wasn't overbearing.
Yeah.
We knew that our place was, in the church, to, be actively engaged in the church. But he also gave us freedom to kind of find ourselves. And I think consequently, it didn't cause us to rebel against the church, but to embrace the church all the more. We didn't rebel against our parents. We embraced them all the more. And I believe that he saw us as human and human beings and seemed less, he wanted us to do the things that were good for us, but he wasn't overbearing, and he wasn't sheltering us. He was covering us, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, that's how my wife and I brought up our children the same way, because we recognized that when we were younger, we used to go out to parties. And one of the things I remember my mother saying to me was that if you are at a party and you have a drink and you leave the drink on the bar and you go out on the dance floor, you don't come back to the same drink.
Yep.
And so we didn't press upon them.
Yes.
For the same reason, we didn't want them to hate church. So as a result, we let them enjoy their life just as we have enjoyed ours. So that's significant.
And can I make you laugh?
Yes,
so that's how he engaged the women in the church. The older women in the church were a little different. I remember one Sunday when my father, we were at church, my sister, closest in age to me, we were in church and we had on some skirts. And I can't imagine they were mini skirts, because we didn't dress that way. My mother didn't dress us that way. But I guess the church ladies thought they were short or too short. And I will never forget that we were being reprimanded. We were being admonished by admonished not to wear short skirts by some women in the church. I think they were deaconesses. And they were chastising my sister and me. And they didn't know that my father was behind them. And he came on in and he said, "You all look so good in those skirts. I just love you too in those skirts. Just keep wearing those skirts." And the ladies were like, "Oh, oh." But he was that kind of dad.
Yeah.
Right. It was kind of like, if I'm not making a big deal and I'm letting them live their lives, then who are you to tell my little girls, turn young ladies, how they are to show up in the world?
Your aunt Sylvia, who I just adore, gave us a wonderful retrospect of her brother, and then you gave a retrospect as being the daughter of him being your father. They were both activists. Speak about your mother, Miss Natalie Jones, because I know that you talked about the 10-year divorce and coming back, but speak of her. And the reason why I asked, if you would, everyone knows Dr. William Augustus Jones. I guess there are a few people in close confidence that know about Mrs. Natalie Jones, but just give us a little insightful information on her.
So my father was kind of a giant of a person, physically and in some ways figuratively, right? He had a deep voice, like a booming voice, and he was raised, as I said, third generation preacher, that I think helped him to feel that he was purposed in life to speak truth to power. He used to say, freedom is the ability to say no to a lie, to veto an untruth. Now, I set that up to tell you that then along comes my mother, and they meet when she's 18, a little younger than 18, but they start dating when she's 18. And no, they started dating when she was 17. They married when she was 18. She's all of like 5'2", maybe five, she'll say 5'3", but, and just this like, petite, very kind of gentle, like looking person and in spirit. And I think that she often was, like kind of like people saw her as living in his shadow. And, and they were coming along at a time when there were certain beliefs about the first lady in the church, what her role was. She could participate in activity, but not necessarily have ministry. Could she have her own career? Did she need, I mean, that was back in a time, we're going back to the 60s and the 70s.
Well, that was back in the time where the churches reviewed the first lady to stay in your place.
Exactly. You put it out there. You said it just right.
I said it, yeah.
You said it, right? And,
yeah.
and this sense of, you just like, wear a pretty hat and a nice outfit on Sunday, and that's it. And maybe we'll have you like say a word or two at this tea or whatever. And that's not really who she was. She felt like God had given her a calling and a purpose in life. And so they struggled in their marriage because he was this traditional Baptist who'd come from the Southern family, like was raised by a mother who was, she was an activist in her own right, but in the church, she sat back. Now, my mother's ministry and calling was not in the church per se. She was working with substance abuse persons, teaching them art, but it was a struggle. And at a certain point in their marriage, it became irreconcilable. And she began to like center on, okay, how do I feel like I'm a whole person who God has purposed to do certain things? And so what I learned from her in my formative years was I saw a woman who, by some people's accounts, had stepped away from an ideal like Black family situation. And some people criticized her for it. They made up stories about her. How dare she, divorce, from William Augustus Jones? She decided, I'm just going to give it to you since you asked. My father traveled a lot. And so he was home on the weekends most often, but he was doing a lot of revivals around the country. And we lived with my mother Sunday night through Friday, and then we were with my dad Friday through Sunday. What that translated into was the church saying, poor Reverend Jones, his wife has abandoned him and left him with the children. And she knew that, but she was a strong, determined woman, and she was not going to let any of that, like friction that other people might create get in the way of she and my father raising us together. And so I saw strength, I saw dignity, I saw grace, I saw sacrifice, I saw humility, and I saw perseverance, resolve. And she just created a model for me of someone being true to themselves without trying to compromise others and just living into your purpose. She used to say to us, things like she'd say, get your degrees before you get married. Because she understood that she got married early and had 4 children and then had to kind of work her way back into the life career that she felt she was purposed for and was. She'd say, have as many children as you want, because at the end of the day, they're yours to raise. And what she was really saying was, women cannot do it all exceedingly well. They can't do every single thing. So be careful about how much you take on. And she'd say, keep yourself looking good because you never know. And I used to be like, oh my gosh, what was she saying? And what I came to learn as I matured in life is that she was just teaching us how to show up in the world. This kind of keep yourself looking good because you never know was really about, you never know where you're going to be positioned to do the work God has purposed you to do. So just keep your mind open and be the person God intends for you to be. And then, like you'll be ready to take on those opportunities when they present themselves. Just a force, an incredible force. And I'm so blessed to have had both her and my father as role models.
Now, the one thing, well, a few things, but the one thing I really appreciate about your dad is that when I first came to Bethlehem, knowing full well that he loved my predecessor, the late Roman Jacques Nyman. And I remember going to Reverend Nyman's homegoing service, and I remember your father saying that Roland was supposed to do my funeral. And I remember that. But he invited me over his house for dinner, where I first met Reverend Clive Neal of the Bedford Central Presbyterian Church. And so he invited us over for dinner, and along with Victor Hall and a few others that were there. And he didn't have to do that, but I think it was his way of welcoming us into the community that he had already been involved in for so many years. Now, when you talk about perseverance from your mother, that was recently and still is your demonstration of faith and physically what you had gone through. So please share with us that.
I'm so in this moment, I'm holding that because it is faith that that brings us through the most challenging moments in our lives, and in so doing, when we face our next challenges, as they will come, we know that faith brought us through and will bring us through again. My dad used to preach about the storms of life, and he'd say, everybody goes through storms. You're either in one, coming out of one, or about to go through one. Nobody goes through life without experiencing storms. And he would talk about preparing for the storm, that these storms are coming. So you need to prepare, just as when a hurricane hits and you bring in all of the items from the outside that could be picked up and blown away, or a tornado taking them up and taking them away. You go and you button down the hatches and you bring everything in, you prepare. He would say you need to prepare for the storms in life. And the way that you do that is by growing your faith. So, and your faith often grows from being tested, as I said a minute ago. Well, in 2009, I came down with leukemia, and leukemia came out of nowhere. The leukemia presented as a flu-like fever, and within just a few days, we learned that I had leukemia, and just a couple of days later, we learned that the doctor said I was going to die, believed I would die, not in like 6 months or a year, but the doctor said that I was going to die 2 days after I was diagnosed, like within 48 hours. And the blessing here is that I didn't die because God had another plan. And when we learned that I was suffering and that I might die, my mother, my husband, my siblings just went to the Lord in prayer. I was actually in a coma. They went to the Lord in prayer. And they got people all around the city and even beyond to pray for me. I'm told that a call went out that Bill Jones's daughter was in trouble and we needed to pray. And so I received chemotherapy, which the doctors didn't believe would work, but indeed it did. And when I came through, what I learned was that the cancer was environmentally caused. I was in 9/11. They believed that it was tied to 9/11. And that the cancer resulted in a broken chromosome, which rendered my blood and bone marrow system defunct. I needed, in order to survive the disease, according to the doctors, I needed a bone marrow transplant. I needed a new blood and bone marrow system. And what we quickly learned is that the most likely persons to match for a bone marrow transplant, you need a donor from an adult, are persons of the same race and ethnicity. I'm a Black American. I needed someone of the same race and ethnicity. And so my siblings were tested and they didn't match. We turned to the bone marrow registry with 2 million people in it, and nobody there matched. And so then we turned to the community, and my husband, leading the way, ran drives all across the nation to find me a bone marrow donor. It was a very harrowing experience. The likelihood of my survival was significantly less. The likelihood of my survival was significantly less than the likelihood of my my dying. There was a greater likelihood, 99% chance of me dying than surviving. And what we experienced throughout the journey and the challenge was witnessing community coming together, people across the nation who didn't know me, coming forward and willing to be a donor to help save my life. We witnessed how our faith community was just rallying around us and holding us up in prayer. We experienced our own family growing and maturing, our children, my siblings, like all of us, my husband, just finding greater love and a sense of selflessness. And so, I write about joy in a book that I published, Consider Pure Joy, telling the story of going through a crisis. And even though you're not certain how it's going to turn out, just seeing how God is working at every turn. Your faith is being tested, but if you stay the course and you just lean into God and you embrace the journey, knowing that, that He is with you, and no matter the outcome, you're going to be okay. It actually proves to be a blessing, and your faith grows, it intensifies, and you feel like Superman. You feel like Superwoman when you come out. I have a cousin who once said to me after I came through, he said, "You must feel like you've been given a second chance." And I looked at him, I said, "Not really. It feels more like a promotion." Wow. Because I felt like God had taken me through something and I'd grown and He elevated me to another level. And so now I live appreciating that the hardships are going to come, but nothing's going to rock my world that the Lord, like the Lord doesn't have an answer for. There's nothing that's going to come my way. A few weeks ago, I had lung surgery. They cut a wedge of my lung out. I'm still holding. I'm still praising God. I'm still living. COVID, I learned through COVID that as everybody, we all were, shut down and shut in. I realized that my resolve and my strength, I was relating back to my experience of being a cancer patient and being shut down and shut in. At one point in time, not being able to see my son for a period of about like little less than 2 months, not being able to hold him. He was young at the time, for about 6 months, not even being able to like put my arms around him. Mm. And so that experience prepared me for COVID. And I just learned God is always working it out. And the tests you go through will then set you up for the tests that are sure to come. The storms that you go through will help prepare you for the storms that are to come. If you lean in and you lean into that faith and you hold on and you trust and believe, you're going to be good for the next one.
Now, let me just say this. I have so many things that we're going to talk about, but you've said so much that has me to segue into other areas. Just a couple of weeks ago, Reverend Carl Washington, the president of Empire State Baptist Convention, had you to be the host as it relates to many doctors who were talking. And how did you gather them together? Is it contact with them? Did you know them personally?
Because so I knew two. Yeah, I knew two, but the other ones were pulled together by the Empire Baptist State Convention. But I knew two, Empire Baptist Missionary Convention. I knew two of them. One of them is here in New York, in Brooklyn, I should say. Dr. Wayne Riley, who is the president of SUNY Downstate Medical Center. And, SUNY was the epicenter for our COVID cases back last spring. He was like the go-to for Brooklyn, New York on COVID. And now he is the go-to helping to raise awareness about the vaccine. And really, he's hard at work trying to help people understand what the vaccine is, how it works. And as he talks about how it'll keep you here. That's what he says.
My guest tonight is Dr. Jennifer JonesAustin, Esquire. We should certainly put that in. And I'm so glad to have her. The Cash App, as comes before your screen so you can see where that is. And then, of course, our guests for the next a few weeks, we're going to show you them. Next Wednesday will be Minister Kenia Allen, the Associate Minister of the Bethany Baptist Church in Jamaica, Queens, where her pastor, the Reverend Dr. Craig Scott Brown, she will be talking to us and sharing with us on millennials in ministry, as well as from her perspective as a young person and a young preacher coming up, and a young woman preacher at that. Then the following week, we will have the Reverend Adrian Reed, who is the senior pastor of the New Jerusalem Baptist Church in Brentwood, which is in Long Island. I've known him before he was born, if it can be put that way. And then following Reverend Adrian Reed, this cat I want to talk to, Pastor Timothy, Pastor David Wright, senior pastor of New Grace Tabernacle Christian Center, talking about the Knicks going to win everything. And I'm about to shoot his shot when he gets on a couple of weeks. And following that, will be, for that following week, Pastor Cynthia McCants of the Cathedral of New Gethsemane East will be certainly our guest. So we're looking forward to that. Now, considering many are taking the vaccine, how do you view President Biden during this time?
Well, you know what I find really interesting in this moment? I find it interesting that so many of the persons who are continue to be Trump supporters have stated that they will not be taking the vaccine, and that just 10% of Biden supporters are continuing to express reservations about taking the vaccine. What I find so interesting about that is that these vaccines were actually developed during the Trump administration.
Yeah.
But yet the Trump supporters are saying in significant numbers that they're not going to take the vaccine. What I'm appreciating is that President Biden has come in, and I guess having been in the Senate and having been in the White House as vice president, knows his way around and has been able to, in relatively short time, build up the vaccination production and start moving it out and about across the state. So what I guess what you asked me, how do I view him right now? I think that he is seeking to do the work of making sure that all who want to be vaccinated are indeed vaccinated. I feel like I do feel a little bit like I'm safer. I feel like we have a president who's honest, or more honest, transparent, and who is empathetic to the experiences of people who've been, challenged by COVID, loss of life, loss of loved ones, loss of income, loss of stability, and that he's really working in earnest. He's working hard to try to make sure that our needs are met. I think that, he's still in his honeymoon period. And, we're going to get a little closer, we get out of COVID, and then we can look at like what's really going on. And there's a lot that we may have to take him to task for. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with anti-gun violence. I hope he presses on that right now, because this nation, I was thinking to myself earlier today, what is it? We have about a month of discourse about gun violence in America and what the legislature at the federal level should do. And then we move on to something else. And now it never fails. Then we get another tragic incident like we saw last week in Atlanta, the killing of persons, but predominantly Asian American persons. And then what we saw in Colorado, again, when is this nation going to stand up and do something? In other parts of the world, they've learned how to live without guns. In the United Kingdom and in other places, they've learned how to police communities without guns. We can do it too, but there's just no will to do it. It's too much politics in it.
But Dr. Austin, someone would say that this is America. This is just my words here. America still has not divorced itself from England. And I mean in certain ways, that America was so happy and enthralled of their independence from England, and then to make up their own rules as it related to slavery. I think that John Calhoun, There's a book out written by, I think, Christopher Elder. And in the book, John Calhoun, what people don't realize was that he was a proponent of slavery and how he talked about how slavery was good for the economy of America. But they said by being a graduate from Yale, his articulation was so vast that he can speak about slavery without using angry words. That with his words, and he was in John Quincy's administration, which I did not know, but he would use it, that he would convince people, yeah, I guess that is the right thing. So when we talk about how America can't follow suit, the countries that have been stereotyped by the American public are looked upon as doing things backwards.
Right.
And they progress forward, and America still wants to be America. Now, there's nothing wrong with America being America, but there's nothing wrong with America being progressive. And by not being progressive, they still think there's certain things that happen. Now, I do want to ask you this. Ronald Reagan, excuse me, Dr. Austin, I still hate his, and I use the word hate, excuse me for doing that, but I hate his influence. He said, good government is the only solution, depending on what good. Now, do you agree or disagree with that?
I don't believe that good government is the only solution. But what I do believe is that government is the foundation upon which this country, it's the construct which drives this country. So government was established, our rules and our procedures and the way that we move through the world, through America, was established. A government was formed to guide our behaviors, our activities. And that guidance was informed by values and beliefs, many of which you just spoke about. Remember, we've got to remember that the people who came over and discovered America, in air quotes, were many of the people who were being dejected and rejected from Europe. And so they were already in this kind of have not mentality. So then they come over to America, and now they get to be the haves, and they get to conquer others and treat them as the have-nots. So there was this foundation where we were going to have some who, we were going to set up this capitalistic, militaristic, racist society, and we had to figure out who we're going to have a capitalistic society. We had to figure out who could have and who could not. So then what we did as America, or they did, was to make it race-based. We would make this determination on the basis of people's skin color, right? And then we would bring in the militarism aspect, because we had to figure out how to, keep those who were at a disadvantage staying at a disadvantage. And so we had to create this society where, guns and weaponry, and we take action against people who are recalcitrant in their minds, that kind of thing. All of that to say is, if you bring it forward to today, you're not going to undo racism just by us being kind one to another. You've got to figure out how you undo some of these systems, these structures that are embedded in our foundation. And it's interesting because we may talk in a little while about some work that I'm about to do that ties directly to this.
Well, I was just going to go into that because, again, you so wonderfully allowed me to segue into the part that I was going to talk about early, but I think hearing your voice is a good time to really talk. Now, the mayor, was it yesterday? The mayor announced that Mayor de Blasio, who came to the Bethlehem Nation in 2016, and him and his wife came, and he just made you to be head of a commission called the Racial Justice Commission. Now, I know that deals with all peoples of color. There are Black people that I know, and I'm sure that you know, who've never spoke about the injustices of their own people, but now make an issue. which is not to separate ourselves from the Asian community. That how that and is Dr. Austin is with not the commission itself, but the way the country is heading. Mm-hmm. Does it seem like Black people's struggles will not be in the history books 50 years from now, considering in the way which we're moving?
So my hope and my prayer is that our story, our struggles feature more prominently in the history books. I think one of our greatest failures as a society, and then I'll even say even in our own homes as Black people, has been not to, America, white America determined not to tell our story or to retell our story. So, there's been a lot of talk about textbooks in the South that refer to slaves as unpaid workers, I'm thinking of another example of, right now when we talk about the Martin Luther King Jr. and, after the passage of the Martin Luther King holiday, how America has watered down what he stood for. So, Martin Luther King Day becomes a day of service, where everybody goes out and, we volunteer at a food pantry, or we paint a mural, maybe we go visit the sick and shut in, and we have young people like read to older people. Anybody can be great because everybody can serve, right? Like, and that's what becomes what the narrative is around Martin Luther King Jr., because that's palatable, that, people can feel good. But maybe we need to unpack and let people know that no, Martin Luther King Jr. was standing for human rights and was trying to stamp out injustice, took a beat down on several occasions because he was speaking truth to power about the violations of our civil rights. So America has for centuries watered down its ugly racist history and how it has impacted the Black community. My fervent hope is that that our stories are more prominently featured in the history books because it's part of America and the building of America, how despite how we were treated, we just kept persevering and we stayed the course. Also because when we lose sight of our history, then we lose sight of who we are as a people, our resolve, our determination, our strength, and our fortitude. And we forget that there are these people who, have been continually intent for 400 plus years of keeping us down. So I hope our history becomes more prominent. But the other thing is that, I believe that we're only going to undo racism if we begin to tackle it at every turn. I think that, there's a lot of attention in this very moment to the experiences of Asian Americans and the rise in hate crime against Asian Americans, especially over the last year and a half now, because of COVID, and how Trump talked about COVID and the people who gave it to us, if you will. I think that we've got some work to do with our Asian American brothers and sisters. I sat with some just a few days ago, and they were in pain, and just talked about how much they're hurting. And I said to them, I'm here and I empathize with you. But we've been hurting for 400 plus years, right? And not everybody in the Asian American community was working and moving with us. So, Black Americans will come and stand with anybody in pain, but we need you all to now stand with us. I think that so much has been done in this society to pit people of color one against another. And for a long time, Asian Americans were deemed the model minority. Yes, some Japanese Americans were interned during World War II, but for the whole, they pitted Asian Americans against us. And we even see it today. You think about the fight around specialized tests for high schools, and the fact that Black kids in New York City don't have the same access to the test schools. where Asian Americans dominate in like greatly numbers, in the great majority. And when they started talking about changing those tests up, Asian Americans were like, no, 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 these are my spots.
Yeah.
So we're going to need to figure out how we work through those issues, because I think we're better collectively. But I do think that we cannot ignore the work that needs to be done to dismantle these structures that are embedded in government and that are shored up by government. And that's what this commission's all about. The Racial Justice Commission, that's what it's all about. It's about looking at our city's laws and discerning what by design, what by implementation, and what by outcome is disadvantaging people of color and beginning with Black Americans.
I think that that speaks volumes of what you said. But now here's the thing that's so interesting to me. And when you were on the with the Empire Missionaries, with Empire State Missionary Baptist Convention, you had made a statement, and I understood that statement as well and agreed. You said that the church has to do more than just pray. And you had emphasized some things. Please run that back to us if you can, Dr. Austin.
So we were talking, if I'm remembering correctly, we were talking about COVID and the effects of COVID and what people are experiencing. We were talking about the fact that people have experienced job loss. More devastatingly, they've experienced in our community in tragic numbers, although one life lost is too many, but in tragic numbers, just death at a level that is unconscionable. We talked about how young persons are, going to be so far behind academically because of all the time lost not being in school, and because our nation did not, make sure that many of our communities had the resources that were needed to make sure the kids were learning remotely in an effective manner. So we talked a lot about that. And then we touched upon mental health. And, it's unfortunate, but not enough attention is being paid, in my opinion, to the trauma that we all have experienced, being cut off from loved ones, not being able to touch and hug and hold, not being in community, and then the fear of COVID, and the fear of its return, and the fear of potentially losing life, or the loss of life, of family, of friends, of colleagues, of church mates. There's going to be a whole lot of trauma that this nation has never demonstrated a desire to do anything about. What I mean by that is, we knew from Vietnam that so many of our people were returning devastated because they'd watched and they killed, and they didn't understand what it was for, what it was about. They were fighting a war that many in America were saying we shouldn't have been in. So they weren't feeling supported by their country. We shouldn't have been there, but many people were feeling like, my own country doesn't value what I'm doing. They came back with a lot of trauma that this country never paid attention to. Then we went over to Iraq, and the same thing happened. And Afghanistan, and so many of our people have returned and are traumatized. I know from my own healthcare scare that I suffer from what they call post-traumatic stress syndrome. My illness presented as a flu-like fever. Don't let me get a fever. Because my immediate thought is, oh my goodness, am I sick again? PTSD. We've got kids who grow up in foster care, kids whose parents, for one reason or another, may become justice involved. There's a lot of trauma that attends there. And this society has never dealt with that. We've got 10 times more people people who are mentally ill, 10 times more likely to be in jails and prisons than in mental health institutions. We don't deal with mental health, and the trauma that is attending so many of us because of COVID we don't have an answer for. So the church, like historically said, just pray it away. God's got you.
Right.
You're going to be all right.
Right.
And what I was saying on that call was, God does have you. But just as we see that God has brought, pastors to minister to us, and God has brought lawyers to deal with our legal issues, and God has given us physicians to deal with our healthcare issues. God has given us teachers to help educate our children, right? God's also given us mental health counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. And the church has to recognize that that doesn't necessarily take away from our spiritual growth. But, God has given us people who are resourced in this way. And there also are spiritual counselors out there who are, like knowledgeable in both like faith. They got their faith, and they also have a certificate hanging on their wall. And I believe we as a church need to lean in and make sure that our communities have the resources and supports that they're going to need to get through this.
Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I just found this out last week that you can view this on your smart television, which I was not very smart to know that it was smart. To my administrative assistant, Linda Atkinson-Kendall, she views it on her big screen television. You go to the YouTube, and you're able to see it on the big screen. I didn't know that until last week. So we'll get more information so it can be flashed across the screen in the coming weeks so that you can know that as well. Now, LeBron James is part owner of the Red Sox. Now, LeBron James from Cleveland gets to be part owner of the place where Babe Ruth first started. And the last baseball club to hire Black people. Now he's part owner. So how do you assess that whole thing?
Look, I'm giving you the ugly face because that is just all I can say is, he's one bad dude. That man, look, we got to remember when we go back to, I can't remember what year it was when LeBron James said to to Cleveland, bye-bye.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I want to win, and I'm going where I can build a team and I can win. And remember how that community, they badmouthed him, they booed him, they were so angry with him because he was a Black man who said, I'm not going to be owned. I'm not going to be bought. I'm not going to be silenced. I'm here to do a certain thing, right? And so he went and he did his thing in Florida. Then he went back, right, and did some more. And then he went, now he's out in LA and he's doing some more. When he established a school in his hometown.
Yeah.
Right. And, and remember, like, he was speaking out on issues and Trump was trying to shut him down and tell him just keep playing basketball. And that TV commentator who said the same, who shall go unnamed in this moment because I don't want to speak her name. And he was like, I don't think so. The way that he has rallied for his community and just kind of lifted up and supported his community and created opportunity for children who may not have seen opportunity. He's just bad. He's bad. And so if anybody could roll up in Boston, right?
In Boston, yeah.
Right? In Boston and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to do it. LeBron James. Because remember, it wasn't like 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago that the Boston Red Sox had one of their most, racist incidents. It was just last year.
Yeah.
So that's what I think of this. And you know what I say? My mantra is, I say to people all the time, I believe that God gives us life to help fulfill his purposes. And when we fulfill them, he calls us home. Not a moment before or not a second after. When we've done all that God has purposed us to do, he calls us home. When I think about LeBron James, I just believe that he's living his purpose. And he knows that God gave him a platform to speak out and challenge, dismantle systems of oppression, systems that have sought to marginalize people and to treat those of us who are of the same race and ethnicity as less than. And so he's using his platform, as the often debated, the GOAT in basketball. He uses that platform however he can, in whatever ways he can, to just keep challenging these bars, like just breaking barriers and crashing, like just killing bars that have been set. That's what I think.
Well, you're saying he's a GOAT of a different status. That's what you're saying.
He's a GOAT of a different status. He may not, it's still debatable whether or not he's the greatest of all time when it comes to basketball.
No, that's not debatable. That's Michael Jordan. You know that.
Well, then you and I are good. We good on that. We good on that.
Okay, that's Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
So we
good on that. We're good on that.
Kobe Bryant.
Good on that. But
Kobe
he is,
Bryant,
and Kobe Bryant. What are you gonna say?
No, go right ahead. Finish what you're saying.
I am right there with you. What I do believe is that he is showing us, in some ways, in the same spirit that Muhammad Ali did.
Absolutely.
How to use the platform. All eyes on you. Let me show you what I can do. You decided how far I could get and where I could go. And remember, this is a brother who they almost kept out of the NBA. Yeah. Going back to when he was in high school, and tried to say that he had violated some rules. And he rose above that and has just kept on rising. That's what I think.
Well, now let me just say this: Kobe Bryant was asked in the documentary "The Last Dance." He had already died, and they put that part in there when Kobe Bryant was asked, was there comparison between him and Michael Jordan? And he said, just hold your point. He says, there wouldn't be me if it wasn't for him.
It's 9:00.
And then I thought about your father, because there really wouldn't be Al Sharpton and many of us if it wasn't for Dr. William Augustus Jones, Operation Breadbasket, and all those other kind of things. And even for preachers who want to really craft their preaching, they have to look at a person like Dr. Jones, and of course the late Dr. Gardner Taylor, and one of my favorites, Dr. Manuel Scott out of Texas. So
yes.
It's that. But I want to ask you this now. According to the New York Times, according to last week's New York Times, that all of some of the sports venues and the art venues will be opening, according to Governor Cuomo. Do you see that? All right. You give me the side eye. All right. So we'll.
I think that that the last 7.5 years, as to both de Blasio and Cuomo have been in office, there have been moments where our city has benefited from the rivalry between the two. And I think there have been times when we have been compromised. And what I'm not sure about is the reopening, at full capacity of the sports venues, whether or not that is something that's going to benefit us or if it's going to compromise us. And I just think that they both have been in this dance for far too long, and it's had consequences for us. Can I tell you something that might be interesting to you? So I'm in my home office.
Yeah.
And trying to find something for you real quickly. So I'm going to show you this. Hold on.
Oh yeah, God in the Ghetto.
And I'm going to show you. Wait, I'm coming back to you, and I'm going to show you this. Now, that was unconventional, right? God in the Ghetto.
God in the Ghetto.
In 1979.
Yes.
Considered a seminal work of my father, where he deconstructs racism in America and the role of religion, and then provides sermons centered on how you preach social justice. Here is the part of the manuscript for a book to be released at the end of April titled God in the Ghetto, A Prophetic Word Revisited. And it is the reprint of God in the Ghetto, which people have been telling us now for, oh goodness, I guess maybe about, at least since I've been in the mix, my father has been gone, about 15 years, that it should be reprinted. Because it is as relevant today, unfortunately, about racism in America and how we must work together as a community to overcome it. They've been saying that it needs to be reprinted. So I've reprinted it along with a foreword by Michael Eric Dyson, an introduction by James A. Forbes, and then contemporary responses, taking his work and then applying it to today's world by Al Sharpton, a guy by the name of Freddie Haynes, who's a big in social justice in Dallas, Texas. Let's see, Al Sharpton, Freddie Haynes, Jacqueline Thompson, who's at the Allen Temple in Los Angeles, Alfred Smith Sr., a guy by the name of Marvin Mickle, who was a son of Dad's and was the president of Colgate Theological Seminary, and William J. Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, and a guy by the name of Michael Walrond, who is at First Corinthian Baptist Church, who once told me the story of how God in the Ghetto, when first printed and he first read it, changed his life forever. And so the book is going to be out at the end of April. And look, maybe if you'll have me, we can come back and we can talk about it in the fall.
Well, I'm going to have you. I'm going to have you back. I'm going to have you back. But let me just ask you this. You talked about all of these preachers. Now, this is Insight. This is a program that's not for the faint of heart. We talk about the various things that people impact with us, but it also could be controversial. So I'm going to ask you this question, Dr. Austin. Considering the social consciousness of theological studies, there are preachers, and everybody has their differences. I get that. Mm-hmm. But there are African-American preachers who think there is no such thing as a social consciousness as it relates to the Bible, that they should stick to the Bible. My wife is in a class last night in which the professor said, if you are not engaging in the social consciousness of the Bible, you're not preaching. Mm. So considering that there are preachers who don't believe in it. They preach the Bible, nothing else. Preach the Bible, nothing else. When we can't even look at Jesus as being our savior because he was the one that was part of a systematic racism and culture and status. Mm. What do we say to that?
So I think about, when I read the Bible, I see Jesus as a leader of the social gospel movement. I see that Jesus was, when Jesus in Matthew 25 tells the parable of, God, saying to those who did not care for the imprisoned, the homeless, those who were unclothed, those who were hungry. And he says to those who, that did not care for them, like, go from me. But he turns to those who did, and he says, you are my children, come unto me, essentially. And those who, and those who did not feed the homeless and what have you, they say, because he says, what you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me. And they say, well, when did we see you? Right? You get what I'm saying? Like, that was social gospel.
Yeah.
That was moved. I mean, Jesus moved throughout the community when he healed the infirm. Right? When he, when he prayed for those who were struggling, right? When he fed people, that was social gospel. It's in the Bible. Yeah. But there are ministers, to your point, who say, yeah, that's not up in there. Just, all I'm supposed to be doing is saving people.
Yeah, they listen to Charles Spurgeon, nothing wrong with that. but then reject Howard Thurman.
Yeah. No. Jesus, I love my in one of the sermons that I've actually added 5 sermons to the reprint as well. And one of them is titled God the Revolutionary.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And Dad writes about how God Jesus in the form of man, God in the form of man, and Jesus was a revolutionary. You know, how he challenged the temple dwellers. He was a revolutionary when he went out into the streets, and when he determined that, you know, on Saturday that he still had to heal the people because that was the work that God had purposed him to do. He was a revolutionary. He was the social gospel.
Yeah. 2 more questions I want to ask you. Now,
I'm having a good time with you.
I'm having a good time too. Listen, you went to Beijing, China. Now, I was there too. Tell me how your experience in Beijing, China.
So I went with my children and with my husband. And a couple things that stand out to me from that time. Well, the first thing I'll tell you, I'll make you laugh about this. We went, I guess we got there in Beijing, maybe a day or two after. I'm going back to, I think this was 2014. And we were on the heels, if you will, of Michelle Obama and her daughters. They were in Beijing, China, right ahead of us. So they were like they were on the tours and hitting the places and spaces that we were going to like the day after. So what we would do is we would look in the paper for where they had dinner, and then we would go there. And the reason being was that what they were doing was they weren't new in the White House, but they had taken a lot of heat for their trips in prior trips for spending exorbitantly taxpayer dollars. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. You know, exorbitant may be relevant, I don't know. But they were eating in China like, you know, at like $5 spots. But they were the good spots. So we literally would like read in the news where they'd eaten, and then we'd scurry and we'd get a reservation, or we'd show up there. And so I remember that. I remember the fog and the pollution, and just like, you know, like how it seemed so normal for them. And I don't know if when you were there, people wearing masks all the time.
Well, what year did you go, if you don't mind me asking?
I think it was 2000. I think it was, you know what, I said 2014. It wasn't 2014. No, it was 2014. My daughter, was the year before my daughter graduated from high school.
Well, did you notice any complexion differences in the people in Beijing? Now, the reason why I asked you that, when I first went to Beijing, you know, we went to about 7 cities. And we went to Beijing, and I met an artist that did I have it in my office, where he did this wonderful collage and a picture of Jesus in wool. And Jesus was Black. There was an Asian woman on the right, and then there was a white girl on the left. When I went to Beijing, a lot of those Asians who were in Beijing were of a darker hue. Did you run into any of that?
You know, I'm trying to think. I don't remember that, but what I do remember was that they were very friendly to us. And I do remember that we were on a tour. It was a group tour, and they were more conversant with us, with my children and my husband and me, than they were, and we were the only people of color. They were more, you know, engaged. They wanted to talk more with us. They, you know, wanted to share experience. That I do remember. Because I also remember people were like, why are they like, you know, like wanting to engage with them so much? That's interesting. I do remember going to Egypt with my father, to Israel and Egypt. And I'm going back to the 80s and being surprised at how the Egyptians, they weren't, many of whom we came into contact with weren't of a browner hue, but they certainly identified with, we were on a church group tour, and they identified with us. And it was like, they knew that they were brothers and sisters. They knew that whether or not America and other places wanted to claim them as being, continental African, they were down with it.
Now your book, Consider It Pure Joy, and you've been going through something, you have been going through since 2009.
Yeah.
Please explain that book.
Right. It's a book that chronicles my journey with cancer, my near-death experience. And, essentially, in the midst of that pain, building a greater relationship with God, and so much that I felt joy even at the risk or knowing that I was at great risk of dying. It's essentially about our challenges in finding me a transplant donor, but coming together as family and as a community to lift up and love on and support me and one another, and just taking that crisis and turning it into a testimony of faith and perseverance. I smile when I talk about it, because when I wrote the book, it followed people telling me that I should write, and me saying, why should I write another book about cancer? There's so many books out there about cancer. And then one day it hit me that what would make this book different than the others is that this book was about embracing the crisis, because in so doing, you can draw closer to God. It's about suffering and realizing that your suffering has purpose, and appreciating how Jesus suffered and his suffering had purpose. And so if we are to be Christ-like, then we have to look at our suffering as part of our journey. It's not going to be easy, but from it we can grow and we can find strength and we can be renewed in our faith. And so that's what it's about.
Now, I think we have some pictures of Dr. Austin's family, her husband, her children. I think we got some pictures that are going to be put up there so that you can see. That's her and her father. That's her when she was a little girl. That's her father, Dr. Jones. And I want to thank you for that, Derek. And then as we move on, you'll be able to see, that's the collage of her and her dad. And that's a great.
Wait. Can you go back to that one? I want to show you something.
Oh, you want to go back to that one? Okay, yes.
You know what I love about this? If you look at any of these pictures, or let's say you start at the bottom ones in the bottom left.
Yes.
These pictures were taken. He took this one, I guess, maybe about 2 or 3 years before he died. I took it about maybe 5 years ago. And what I loved was when I saw the two of them side by side, how we were gesturing the same way. If you look at the picture on the far right.
So that wasn't planned. That wasn't planned.
Not planned. We both were the picture on the far right, we were both speaking, and in the same kind of like posturing. And so what I love when I look at some of these pictures is he lives in me. And I'd like to think that that some of the work that I do is born out of what I saw him do, and that his spirit is within me and just saying, go on, Jenny, go on, Jenny. Do what you got to do, Jenny. Yeah, thank you.
And then the other pictures, that's her and David Dinkins.
Oh, that was my guy.
That's not a romantic pose. I just want to that's just a close conversation of the late Mayor David Dinkins.
My guy.
And
that's my guy.
Yeah, that's your guy. That's the husband. Absolutely.
And that 27 is 27 years as of last December.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And then you and your son. That's
my boy. He is now 19. I want to keep making him 18, but he's 19, and he's a freshman at the University of Virginia. If it's God's plan, he wants to go into the MLB. And he's a hardworking student in his freshman year. He is the first UVA baseball player to ever be admitted to the University of Virginia McIntire School of Commerce, which is ranked among all the institutions anywhere between #1 and #3 for the best undergraduate business program in the nation. And after he completed his first semester of his freshman year, he was reclassified because of all the credits that he had taken to college with him as a second semester sophomore. So his graduation date would have been 2024, but it is 2023 now because if it is God's plan for him, he wants to come on out at the end of his junior year and play MLB baseball. And we'll see if that's what the Lord has for him. If not, the Lord's got something else.
And there's the top 4.
And that's my girl. That's my girl on the left.
That's your daughter, absolutely.
That's Kennedy, and she is her granddaddy. Her granddaddy would be over the moon about her. This is a young lady who she is in her last semester of her graduate school program in health and socio-medical science. She is centered on the intersection of sociology and medicine and the experience and how racism and gender create and bring about disparities for our communities.
Reverend Jackson, thank you so much for putting those.
Thank you.
Up. Thank you. Of course, Dr. Austin is a graduate from Rutgers University and Fordham University of Law. It should be known that, the way she talks so much and her connection in the medical field, she sounds literally like a medical doctor, but she is a lawyer. But she has contacted herself and connected herself with people that are very relevant to all of our communities and all of the societies which we live in. So I'm thankful to her. Now, these last two. Now, what's your favorite music other than, this is what I'm going to be asking people from now on. What's your favorite music? And I wish I could have asked your Aunt Sylvia, because I would have liked to have known, but she probably would have said Martha and the Vandellas. What is your favorite music other than church music?
I love me some R&B. I love music that is joyful and makes you want to dance and just experience and relive beautiful moments in life, like moments where you laughed and celebrated. And for me, R&B music, good R&B music does that. Like, the other day, Sean and I were walking down the street and there was a brother moving in the opposite direction on a bike, and he was playing some Michael Jackson. And my husband looked at me like, okay, here she goes. She's going to dance in the middle of the street.
Well, that's what I saw you dancing online a couple of weeks ago, just dancing.
I love dancing. I love music and gospel music too, it just touches your soul and makes you feel joy and peace. And you just can't help but move. And that's gospel, and that could be some good old R&B. Not the greatest fan of current hip hop.
Well, you don't like Biggie? And you up in Brooklyn, you don't like Biggie?
I can get with Biggie, but I can't get with some of this. I'll be honest, like I'd like to be down with the young people. I don't do too well with the music with a whole lot of expletives.
No, I understand.
That I can't get with.
Well, let me make you laugh. I had posted something about Kirk Franklin because of the recent situation with his son,
which I take issue with.
I'm still learning. I mean, I saw a couple of interviews in which he apologized,
but I take issue with us taking him to task.
Well, I did too, because that was my point. Was I was saying that we can't really judge him on that because there are many people in the church. Like I made a statement like, when an iron is dropped on your foot, do you really say ouch? That's what I was saying. So your aunt Sylvia Harris says she made a comment to it. Then she says, and by the way, Reverend, I do say ouch. So that was good. Now
that was good. But let me just say, his son is 33 years old.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other thing. Why are we talking about, like, he is like, the way it got set up, it was like he was abusing like a child.
Yeah.
So I don't even understand that. And I'm not saying that I can.
No, I understand what you're saying. Now, what books have you read that you would suggest to this audience? This is my last question for this evening. What book? God in the Ghetto, right?
Yeah, I'm looking behind me because, forgive me, but there's one of my favorite books that I always introduce to people. It's a book called The Barbarian Way.
Mm.
And essentially it's a book um, about Christ and followers of Christ. And essentially the author posits that often we Christians get Christianity all wrong. And we don't really understand what it means um, to be Christ-like. And so we believe that if we are Christians, we are not to experience any pain or suffering, that the moment that we accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior, everything in the world will be, bright and cheerful. And so it's a book about, like walking that path that Jesus walked and learning from it. And in so doing, becoming more Christ-like, The Barbarian Way. And then another book that I love, that I read a few years ago, is titled, If You Want to Walk on Water, Get Out of the Boat.
Get out of the boat.
All right. And it's about, like you got to take that, you got to have faith and you got to step out there. You can't be like, like the disciples will, I can't get out there, right? Like, how you do? If you want to walk on water, get out of the boat. Right now, I'm about to read a new one of the new Ta-Nehisi Coates books. It's a novel. And then I also have on my nightstand A Long Time Coming by Michael Eric Dyson, which is about racial reckoning.
Yeah.
And then earlier today, I did an interview with Ilyasa for Ilyasa Shabazz, Malcolm X's daughter.
Malcolm X.
And I'm just going to hold up two books that I recommend that we get for our young people: The Awakening of Malcolm X and Betty Before X. These are two books that Ilyasa Shabazz wrote for young adults and for middle schoolers about Betty Shabazz and her father, Malcolm X. And it's an education on how they found their purpose in life, and especially as persons who struggled in their youth. Betty Shabazz was a foster care child.
Yes, she was.
And who came out of the church. And
her father was a deacon in Detroit.
That's right. And then Malcolm X too had a father in the church.
That's right.
And and he he became involved with the law, got caught up in the law. And so, even though they may be they were the Muslim religion, or were of the Muslim religion, they're just these great books and stories for young people who are struggling in this moment, trying to figure out, well, what is their purpose, and what is all of some of the challenges that are, that beset them? How can it add value later in life?
Well, me personally, Dr. Austin, I have no problem with other people of faith. I really don't. Life is not only short, life is somewhat restricted on this side of Zion. So I have no problem with people of different faiths, because I met people of different faiths who are very, very, very good. Ilyasa Shabazz, I want to get on here. I just don't know how to get her. And
so we'll talk about that. Let's try to make that happen.
Let's make that happen. And you know what? You can make that happen while you have my number, because okay. I would love to have her. We're trying to get Jeremiah Wright on. I will tell you that. And but I would love to get her on. But I can't begin to thank you enough. This has been a wonderful interview. Just to remind our people, next week, as we go through our schedule of those who will be coming, Minister Kenia Allen, Associate Minister of the Bethany Baptist Church, Jamaica, Queens. Dr. Craig Scott Brown is her pastor. And of course, the following week, We will have Reverend Adrian Reed, Senior Pastor of the New Jerusalem Baptist Church, who, by the way, him and his wife had their second son just recently. And so congratulations to them. And then following Reverend Reed will be Pastor David Wright, of Senior Pastor of New Grace Tabernacle Christian Center. And then we will have Pastor Cynthia McCants, Senior Pastor of Cathedral at New Gethsemane. Her husband, Bishop Jason McCants, is the senior pastor, and she serves right along with him, but on the east side in Long Island. And then following that will be Jolanda Headley, who is a Joe's Academy of Music. We went to Alliance Theological Seminary together. She's a brilliant, brilliant woman, and she's going to talk about how that school works. And Jackson, I don't know if we have any more after her, but we certainly want you to be for the coming weeks. Now, could you please be so kind? You've been through so much, and there's such a deeper spirit in you. Could you please be so kind as to close us out in a word of prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we come together with hearts filled with thanksgiving and gratitude for all that you have given to us, all that you have provided, all the love that you have shown and continue to show. Dear Lord, we thank you for this community, for this gathering tonight where we could share journey and experience, where we could laugh, where we could love, and where we could lift up, where we could honor our ancestors, and hopefully through our words, give inspiration to others as they just carry on with their respective journeys. Dear Lord, we ask that you continue to cover us, to shore us up for the work that you have called and purposed us to do. We thank you for the ministry, the life and the ministry of Reverend Camp, and how he is blessing us, how he is helping us all to tell our stories, and in so doing, let others see in us all the goodness and the great works that you are doing through us. Lord, bless us as we continue on, as we soldier on in this COVID moment and beyond. Help us to be a blessing to others in all that we seek to do. Help us to do as much good as we can while seeking to do no further, no greater harm. We know that so many are suffering, and for those of us who suffer less than others, let us work to be a blessing to them. We ask all of these things in the precious name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. And I want you to know, Dr. Austin, that one of the members of the Bethlehem Nation, Martha Boomer, is very well familiar with you, and she's an admirer of yours. And Dorio Laria, she has me coming on her what they call the digital couch, and she's storytelling as well. So that's going to be coming in the next few weeks.
You gotta let me know.
Yeah, I will. You've been a blessing to me personally. I'm sure you've been a blessing to everyone else. Please give your husband and your children my regards.
And the same thing, you and your wife and your daughters and your son-in-law. And what wonderful news about your son-in-law.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
I was joyful when I saw that.
Well, that means a lot coming from you.
You are a blessing. Oh, I thank God for you. And I'm now going to do my best to get you Ms. Shabazz.
Oh yeah, I would love that. I would love
okay.
That.
I'm gonna make that contact. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Good night, brothers and sisters.
Good night.